Today, my guest is Reid Goossens. Reid is an Aussie from down under. He was trained as a civil engineer, and he's worked around the world on infrastructure projects, including preparing for the Olympics in London. When he fell in love, he followed his girl to the States, and that's where he learned about the opportunities in real estate investing. He started small, but he quickly realized the importance of scale, and he's raised capital for others. And more recently, he and his business partner have become syndicators themselves and have acquired multiple properties. He's also the host of the podcast, Investing in the U.S., and he's also an author. His book, Investing in the U.S., The Ultimate Guide to U.S. Real Estate. And today we're going to speak with Reid a little bit about some of the projects he's done and specifically about repositioning and rebranding a multifamily property. But first, a quick reminder, if you like the show, please let us know. We would love to hear from you. You can like, you can share, you can subscribe, or leave a comment. Again, we would love to hear from you, our listeners. Also want to remind you that if you'd like to see how handsome our guests are, be sure to check out our YouTube channel on YouTube, and that's Commercial Real Estate Pro Network. And now I want to welcome my guest, Reid, back to CREPN Radio.
G'day, mate. Thanks for having me back.
Oh yeah, no, I'm so glad you're available and that we're able to get back together here. I was looking in the episodes, and it was way back on number 77.
Wow. How many episodes have you done so far?
I think we're closing in on 200. So
wow. Well done.
If you say 50 a year, so it's been a couple years. So we're due. So excited to do that. But Reid, if you could just take a minute and share with the listeners a little bit about your background, and we'll get into it.
Sure. Yeah. So apologies for your listeners today. I am coming from a WeWork office in Los Angeles. So if there's a bit of background noise, just please bear with me, and I'll try my best to block it out. But yeah, so as you said in the introduction, originally from Australia, my thick Aussie accent can clearly tell me apart as soon as I open my mouth. But my background's in structural engineering. I'm a qualified structural engineer. I went to university for engineering. When I graduated, went to London to work on the 2012 Olympic Games back in 2008. After that brief period in London, I went to the south of France. I had an incredible time, a incredible year working on the super yachts for the mega wealthy billionaires of the world, where I met my now wife, Erica, who's American. In that couple of years that I was traveling abroad, I crossed the Atlantic Ocean on this yacht. I went, backpacked throughout the United States. I met Erica. I fell in love with New York. And when I returned to Australia, I really was back in a civil engineering office, and I was thinking to myself, geez, I'm only a couple of years out of university, but I can't see myself sitting in a cubicle for the next 40 years of my life. And really that was the spark within inside me, and I definitely felt like a star athlete sitting on the sidelines, watching my life go by. So over the next couple of years, I definitely educated myself about real estate investing, particularly in Australia. But I still had very much a desire to move and be an expat, back in New York, because I'd fallen in love with New York. So I quit my job in 2012 and moved halfway across the world with no job. And I padded the streets of New York until I got a job. And I think within 2 weeks of being on the ground here in the US, I was at my first real estate networking event. And I quickly learned that I needed to change my, if I thought Aussie had some great networking events, the US was on steroids in terms of just, New York, fast-talking Americans and having to understand the investing lingo and what's credit score and what's an LLC and all this sort of stuff. But also in the same breath, how much the barriers to entry here in the United States are so much lower than what they are in Australia. And I think I bought my first property within 6 months of moving here, all cash, because the banks wouldn't lend to me because I was fresh off the boat. I had no credit, and bought that for like $38,000, triplex in upstate New York. And then over the next, now that was in 2012, but now 2019, there's a lot of things that happened in between there, but that's sort of the background in a nutshell of how I got started here in the United States.
Awesome. Well, I got to ask you one other thing here. I know you're a big fan of rugby.
Mm-hmm.
And is it the Wallabies? Is that the
That's
national
it.
team? It's not
That's
the All
it.
Black. That's the New Zealand team,
That's the
right?
New Zealand team.
Yeah.
That's our
Versus,
rival.
yeah. Okay.
I'm actually going to the Rugby World Cup in Japan later this year, so I'm really really pumped for that. It's the first time I've ever been to a World Cup, and really really excited. So, but we'll get into that in a little bit.
Awesome. And then lastly, I want to ask you, have you ever played a didgeridoo?
A didgeridoo? Yes, I
Yeah,
have.
it's a didgeridoo. Okay.
Didgeridoo, yeah.
Okay.
And
Okay.
it's very hard to play. It's all about the with your lips. You got to like make blow out as if your lips are together and they sort of vibrate, and that creates the vibrations through the through this. It's a type of wood. Don't quote me on exactly what type of wood it is, but it is a wood, a tree or wood that's come from Australia, and it makes an incredible noise when you can play it well. It's that sort of that very baritone, like, you know.
No, right. No, yeah, and I was just thinking that the sound is like that, kind of thing. So it's definitely cool. But well, cool. Glad to hear that you've
tried it at least.
All right. Well, that's definitely something from down under. I would hope that you had a little bit of experience with that. So, all right. So I wanted to speak with you a little bit today. And just to kind of set the stage here, the listeners, most of which are real estate investors or recognize real estate as a vehicle they want to use to create a secure future for their family. You have done some amazing things since your first property there. You talked about the triplex you bought in upstate New York. Since then. And please feel free to fill in the any of the gaps here. But you've been a capital raiser, and then more recently, you and your partner have been the lead syndicators.
Yep.
And if you could just give us the unit count, kind of where number of properties that you guys are at right now, and maybe just a compressed timeline.
Yeah. So back in 2013, got a mentor, started raising money for his deals, and that got my credibility up. In 2015, did a co-syndication, raising money on my first syndication deal. And then in the last 2 years, I've been the lead syndicator with my business partner. We have 1,100 units under management, about $110 million worth of just multifamily. That's just within my business. Now I've been involved in more outside of it, but I was not the lead syndicator. So for anyone who's listening out there, if I can literally come from 7 years ago, 2012, not actually having any real estate whatsoever, to now controlling over $100 million. I don't say it to brag. I say it to inspire people that I moved to this country. I had no friends. I didn't go to school here. I had no family, and I made it happen. And those people sitting on the fence, if you are aspiring to be a syndicator or an operator, it's definitely doable. You just got to know how to do it, and surround yourself with the right people.
No, I love that. The story of the immigrant, however that is, but basically nothing behind you. Except a lot of umption and willingness to do the work is always an impressive story.
Yep.
So, all right. So you've got the 1,100 units. I know from just following you on Facebook and other listening to your podcast and stuff, you have engaged in some I'm going to say heavy lifting in repositioning and rebranding properties.
Yep.
And I guess the place I'd love to start is kind of understand what goes into the thought process of rebranding as opposed to was, not just renovating an option. Can you kind of get into that a little bit for us?
Yeah, so the whole thing, we look to try to buy not Class C, but sort of Class B assets. And the reason we do that is we started off buying 1980s assets in sort of good infill locations with good growth, making sure all the metrics are working well. We try and look for population growth, obviously, in those key submarkets. We want to see that, the average household income is about $50,000 to $60,000. We don't want to be in the low socioeconomic housing. And don't get me wrong, you can make a lot of money doing that. The reason we want to be in that sort of path of progress, so to speak, sort of more affordable, but not the lower end, is because we want to have that stability in the long term from through any sort of financial downturn. We can sort of be that middle of the market. We're not the class A, we're not the class C, we're sort of that class B. So in terms of what we look for, so we look for, as I said, 1980s assets. More recently, we've been buying 1990s and early 2000 assets. The reason is because they have less skeletons in the closet in terms of just roofing issues, siding issues, HVAC issues. They're just the properties are a lot newer, and what our philosophy is obviously to rebrand and recapture value, and really part of the value add process is not just going in and doing up the units and charging an extra $100-$150, but it's rebranding the property. So when we had a property called the Gables. It's an okay name, nothing great, but we changed it to the Joseph at Huebner. And the reason we changed it to that was because the Joseph Huebner was one of the first founding people in San Antonio. So all our assets are rebranded to names of local influential people. We have one of our other assets in San Antonio is called the Lila. The Lila is I think it's the last name of the first female city governor of San Antonio. So just different historical things that we can rebrand the property to. And with rebranding comes, new signage package, new color package. We want to really make sure that curb appeal is changed, because that's where people are going to drive traffic to the property. These assets, as I said, have been built in the 1980s, so they've been around for a long time. People drive past, oh, that's just another multifamily building. But if you can come in and add some real pop of color, change the name of the property, then people are like, oh, wow, is that a new property, or is that clearly under new management? And that's part of the value add process. That starts driving people into the property. And then once people drive over the property line, we want them to subconsciously already start thinking, I want to live here, because they've got a new leasing office, they've got cool amenities, they've got a new gym, the pool's been done up. The property feels cleaner, breath of fresh air has been pumped back into it. So, and then when they see a unit, we'll obviously go and do the renovations. So everything from soup to nuts we try and do. We start with the exterior, work on rebranding it. We then focus on the amenities, make sure they're up to scratch in the first sort of 6 months of owning the property. And then we get into the actual renovation of the renovation program of the units themselves. So in a nutshell, that's we rebrand and we try to recapture value through a handful of what we call value add opportunities within any asset.
Got it. So the rebranding starts from an exterior curb appeal. Mm-hmm. Kind of, is that the first step? Did I get that right?
That's the first step. So usually we have two budgets. We'll have the exterior budget and we'll have the interior budget. The exterior budget will capture all your major skeletons in the closet, siding, roofing, but it'll also have rebranding packages. We want to update the landscaping. We want to do up the leasing office. We want to do up the gym, any pool amenities, really make it sort of sing from an exterior point of view. And so that's in one bucket. And then the other bucket is interiors. And we will never renovate 100% of the units, because that's not what our MO is. We go in and probably renovate between 40 to 60%. The reason is it takes time to renovate 40 to 60% of the asset, but we also want to keep a nice smorgasbord so we usually will have what we call a silver class package, which is where we come in, we'll update the flooring, we'll replace the white appliances with black appliances, we'll paint the cabinets to a nice gray, a two-tone gray paint. Resurface the countertops, put on modern door pulls on the cabinets, put in new lighting, new track lighting. Again, I said update the vinyl flooring to a modern feel, and that will be like a silver class package. And we will probably do that to, as I said, between 40 and 60% of the asset, keeping what we would call a classic. So people may just want to lease the classic. And also when we come to sell the asset in 5 to 7 years' time, there's a little bit more meat on the bone in terms of other, quote unquote value add, because in 5 or 6 years' time, it's going to be someone else's value add to come in and maybe put in a gold package. In that time, people may want stainless steel or, stone countertops with, backsplashes and all that sort of little bits and bobs. But right now, for where we are in the market and in the markets, I should say, a silver resurfaced countertops, black appliances. That is an upgraded silver package for us, and that can get between $100 to $150 a unit, depending on where the asset's located.
Got it. 150 unit ish bump in rents for that. Is there what's your budget for? What's your budget for the cost for that?
Yep. So typically it's about $55,000 to $6,000, depending on how much work for drywall there is in the asset. On the older assets, it would be more towards the 6,000. On the newer assets, it's more towards 5,500. So it really depends on, again, the asset, the year it was built, and what we've got to deal with. On some of our assets, we've actually come in and removed some of the cabinets, uppers they call them, so it really opens up the kitchen to the living room and allows that natural light in. And that can cost you between $300 to $400 by the time you rip the cabinet out, you patch the wall, patch the ceiling, but it just makes that whole thing opened up a little bit more. And it's a quick, easy fix. That can really add a lot of, that looks good. One of our assets actually is a 1980s asset, and if you know the history of building codes and the way in which the people built things back in the day, historically in the 1980s, things were built with 8-foot high ceilings. That's well and good. It's okay. But now in modern day construction, everything's built with 9-foot ceilings. Everything's brand new coming on the market. It's always going to be 9-foot ceilings, maybe even sometimes higher. We actually have one of our assets that was built in the 80s, and it must have been the first one, which has 9-foot ceilings. And I tell you what, it creates the difference it creates. It honestly feels like when you walk in there, and our GC's done an incredible job for resurfacing the counters and removing that upper cabinet and putting in new flooring. It really feels like a brand new construction because of that extra height you get. Now, the thing that gives it away is the goddamn popcorn ceiling, but the popcorn ceiling is an expensive thing to get rid of, and it's a nice to do. We don't actually do it. We just leave it there, but we'll put in new track lighting. We'll put in new what we call puck lights, and we get rid of any sort of those dangly type of fixtures, light fixtures that hang over the living room table. That I'm 6'2". I always hit my head on those bloody things, so we get rid of those, and we put in what's called a slim surface puck, and it looks like a downlight, but literally it's probably 3/4 of an inch deep, and you just click it into the J box, and it looks like a downlight, but it's surface mounted. So, and they're only about $16 each. So compared to a light can, a light can can cost you up to $30 or $40, and then you've got to cut the drywall out to install the can, right? Because it's got a depth of 3 to 4 inches, whatever that might be. So different little things that we do in order to just really brighten up the space, make it look a little bit more modern, and then get that $125, $150 rental bump, depending on the size.
Now, you mentioned the light package. I know that's a huge thing. The light that you get from that, and just how it definitely changes the light in the room, and it just there's a look and feel that's beneficial in that. I appreciate you taking us through that as far as what your kind of budget and what the level of stuff you do there. I want to ask you, so on the upsell from a standpoint of the classic unit to one that's a silver package where you've done this, you're talking about 150-ish a month, kind of a rent bump. What do you see as the value that you recognize with the rebrand?
Yeah, I think the value with the rebrand is huge. I will add that on one of our newer assets we just bought in Austin, it's built in 2002. We're actually not going to rebrand that property. So with that property, it's a very clean looking property already. We're not going to do what we've done to our 1980s assets. The reason we've gone in to do and put that, really enhance that exterior package, is because it was tired. Something is built in 2002. It's not tired. It doesn't look as tired as what it does compared to 1980s. So in terms of the ROI, it's hard to put a figure on it. But in my experience, we like to put anywhere between, call it $200,000 to $500,000, depending on the size of the asset, and depending on what, siding issues and, building facade issues that we might have to fix. But painting can cost you 6 figures. You know, and we will go in and paint the eaves a different color. Then we'll do the windows, we'll do the siding. We may paint the brick. On one of our assets, we've got, I call it the Fred Flintstone rock. I don't know if you've ever been to Texas. They've got these like big rock siding things that just, I don't know what they were thinking back in the 80s, but a lot of architects have a lot to answer for, but you can't do a lot with it. So we have to just, you know, we power wash it and just leave it, just look it clean, but we'll come and paint the siding and do a pop of a really bold color on the trim to really make everything pop. On one of our assets, we had some window, we always will paint the doors to be that pop, you know, whatever we've rebranded the property in the new color scheme, the color palette, the doors and or trim will be updated to that new color. It's typically going to be bold, you know, burnt orange, yellows, you know, greens, those really like, wow, that's something from a distance I can see. And then that color scheme is also in the new branding package, which is at the front of the property. And yeah, the doors, trim, and rebranding are just really small, low-hanging fruit that can really just give the look and the feel of the asset to something. It just brings that energy brings life back to the asset, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So if there's not a direct kind of an ROI that you can put to it, I'm curious, can you speak to any of the feel or the feedback you've gotten from, you know, whether it be the staff or the residents or the community?
Yep. Yeah. Well, definitely when you rebrand an asset, a lot of people who come in, oh wow, you've done such a fantastic job, or I didn't even realize this was the old Oakgate or whatever it was. You know, it's now this new name. I was like, oh, you've done such a great job. And again, people have that psychological, well, I've already driven, wow, like they've driven past, there's new colors, a new sign, they're driving into the property. They're already thinking, geez, I want to move back in here, or I want to move in here subconsciously. They go into the new leasing office. Wow, the new leasing office is modern fixtures and new gym, and oh wow, look at the pool, look at all the new pool furniture. All of a sudden, they're being sold, and we haven't even shown them a unit yet. So it's that psychological change, you know, taking a step from the car, walking the 20 paces into the new leasing office, all these cool new amenities, and they're sort of already subconsciously going, well, I think I might live here. I like it. And if the staff are, and usually we inherit the staff from the older companies that have owned those assets. So usually those staff have been with the asset for many, many years. And a lot of them are just like, we love what you've done. We love it. They buy into it. And that gives them a renewed sense of, you know, pride, and they want to go sell this to existing residents, you know, for referrals, or they want to go out and sell it to the community. So they're really on board as well, and they buy into the whole new, you know, rebranding and repositioning just from doing the leasing office and the exterior, so they can go sell more units and get that higher bump. What we have noticed actually is when we go in and do call it 40% of the units, we see what I like to call a bleed. So we'll do 40% of the units, and those units will get a nice bump between 100 to 150 bucks. But then you'll get other classic units we haven't even touched, and they'll get like a $60 bump or an $80 bump just because we've done the other stuff in the property and people have seen it and driven past. So you talk about ROI, they're the type of stuff that when you underwrite, you're not underwriting to that bleed to happen. So typically it's between 10 to 15%. So if you do 50% of the asset at $150 or 120 bucks, then probably another 10 to 15% of classic units will experience a higher than average renewal rate. Say the renewal rate's 5%, they will experience maybe a 7 or 8% just because you've done so much to the exterior and people are invigorated to want to live there. So there is a thing that you see, and the more deals you do, the different strategies we see and how that bleed works across a 1980s assets versus a 2000 assets. So it's really interesting as we asset manage these things.
No, I love and appreciate you sharing the kind of that bleed kind of a thing, that just kind of more of a pride. It sounds like almost with the staff and how that's immediately transferred to whether it be a prospective resident or the residents themselves. Just, I mean, it's like there's like, wow, this is a great place. That's really cool. So I mean, there is I guess. I don't know. It doesn't sound like you've actually put a number to it per se.
No.
But there's clearly, I mean, you're recognizing a benefit from this rebranding as opposed to the recognizable one where you can go on the interior units and up. There is a transfer there, and that's
there is a transfer, and you've got to be. So if I was to buy a Class C asset, I may not do. I'll probably rebrand it, but maybe I wouldn't do the liquor paint. It really is dependent on the submarket. If you're going to be in a blue collar, $40,000 to $50,000 a year, or $30,000 to $40,000 a year income, going and spending six figures on repainting an asset may not be your best use of your money. But if you're in a Class B where you're sort of that, I'll call it a tan collar, some blue, some white collar, residents, and the average rental, the average household income is between $50,000 to $70,000, it will put you in better stead to go and put that money in. I'll also add that we have done the exterior painting when you want to be doing it when because we're in direct competition with other Class A brand new builds that are directly across the street. So we have to go and do that sort of extra roll up the sleeves and do that extra bit of painting. Now, if that's not necessarily in that neighborhood, because we have some assets that aren't surrounded by brand new construction, we may not choose to do the brick. We just may choose to do the eaves, and that will give it a bit of a pop, and the doors, and maybe repaint the rails. That will give it a pop, and then focus more on the gym or the amenities. So definitely, as we're going through this journey, we're learning where to spend dollars and where it's smarter to spend dollars, rather and dependent on the submarket where I should spend those dollars. Because sometimes you can over renovate. We've seen it in other assets where it's in a really rough neighborhood and they've put in these bells and whistles, and it's like, that would be good in maybe 10 years time, but right now it's not. You've probably overspent.
Right. No, I think anybody that's done any construction, there's always that temptation to go to the next level. But I think there's a discipline that you've got to apply and just kind of really assess.
Yeah, like there's certain things that, from like siding point of view, or siding or maintenance, how much is so that one thing I talk a lot about with my general contractor and my property management team is, you do a resurface countertop, okay, that might cost you $300 per unit, right? Or you go in and put granite in there. Now the submarket might not be ready for granite, but if you spend that extra $800, $500 or $600 right now, you won't be resurfacing that every single time a tenant moves out and costing you $250 every time a tenant moves out. So is the upfront money spent now going to save you in 5 people in 5 years' time, and it's gone through 5 different people moving in and out of that one unit? You may have already spent that dollars that you could have spent on the front end. So it's really like that. You got to that fine line between, do we spend it now, or we just put, we just resurface it, and just, every time someone moves out, we've got to maybe resurface it or repaint it. So it's again, it goes back to, that's the art of it rather than the science, because you have to make a decision as a syndicator whether that submarket, the type of tenant that's living in there, the submarket, is it justified to put in those granite countertops? And 9 times out of 10, it's probably not. And you just sort of take the hit of resurfacing every time someone moves out, or every other time, in 2 years' time. But there's other stuff like siding, where you focus on the siding that are issues in the path of travel. So, you come on the property, you want to say everything facing the pool. Let's definitely hit all that siding, make sure any sort of warped siding is completely removed with new hardy board. But maybe on the back side of the property, where no one's going to see, you may not do it. You may not do it all back there because no one's going to bloody see it. So don't go overspend your money. You may paint it, and painting will give it, seal it and give it a fresh look. But going and replacing, extra 40,000 square feet of siding at the back of the property when no one's ever going to see it, it may not be your best use of money.
Yeah, no, I love the countertop conversation there, because I'm a big fan of the hardscape, or, when I say hardscape, I don't want to make concrete all over outside, but I mean the interior, where you can have, surfaces that can be, that don't have to be redone every time, but can be cleaned or whatever, or, kind of get away from the carpet when possible, and that stuff. So that's awesome. You shared some of the lessons you've learned. I mean, as far as like where to paint, when, kind of a bang for your buck, if you will, recognizing what people are going to recognize. I mean, you started from the street and helped us kind of, as we approach your property, from the door trims and the eaves and just the color transformation there. what are some challenges that you've encountered that maybe, and I'll let you answer that however you want, but I'm thinking there's got to be in all of these that you've done, there's got to be a challenge that you hadn't anticipated that, or maybe you did it, but it turned out entirely different than what you might have thought.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge that you get when you're owning commercial real estate is really comes down to people management. Having a property manager. I'll rewind. Any asset that you're rebranding or revaluing, the way in which you get out of the gate, so to speak, so that think of a sprinter in the 100-meter mark. The 0-meter mark, getting out of the gates really well. Think of Usain Bolt. His first 10 meters is just awesome because that sets the rest of the race up. It's similar with value add. If you'll come out of the blocks slow, or the on-site team doesn't really know what value add is and how to manage that, that can hurt your NOI down the line. So you have to be really cognitive with the right team that you're putting in place and making sure the right construction team. There's always the argument of, do you blow and go at the beginning on the exterior, or do you slowly ramp it up? And from an exterior renovation point of view, getting in and doing the rebranding, the landscaping, the leasing office, all the amenities, doing that within the first 3 to 6 months is so important, because you want to be, and depending on when you buy an asset, that's going to cause the most issues with your on-site tenants in terms of there's going to be a lot of trucks and construction going on. So you really want to minimize that, and you can get in and get that done within the first 6 months. You don't want to dragging on for 12 months. That's where your interior renovations can drag on, because as people move out, you're going to slowly rehab them. But the big heavy lift needs to happen on the front end, in my opinion. And that's how those on-site people take to that. Sometimes people, I want my on-site management team to manage the properties if they owned it. But encouraging someone to do that is easier said than done. So that's probably been one of the bigger challenges that I've seen, is making sure you've got the right team on place. And we've seen it across a couple of assets where literally they're the same vintage, and one property is out of the gates really well, and the other one's a bit slower of a start, and that can have a bit of a catch-up effect, in years 2, 3, and 4. So really look at who's your on-site management team, who's the lead maintenance to understand when issues arise, and who's your construction team. I would always, if you're going to do heavy lifting on the outside, go and hire a third-party general contractor. Don't try and get your interior team to do it, because they're going to be flat out as it is. Making sure they're doing that whack-a-mole and getting rid of all the skeletons in the closet in terms of running the asset, but in terms of actually doing the heavy lifting, replacing siding, doing the painting, doing the landscaping, rebranding, that should be left to third-party people so they can focus on that, and their on-site team can focus on making sure the velocity is kept going with occupancies up. They're pushing the rents, and they're focused on the business plan of it rather than the getting it done. If that, actually rolling the sleeves up and stapling the new siding on the building, leave that to the third party.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And I'm assuming too, just based on the heavy lifting, how much lifting you're doing, the additional workload, it would be just a total drain on resources, time, people. It just, makes complete sense.
Exactly.
Hey, I want to ask you, you introduced a couple of timeline mentions there, 3 to 6 months for the exterior, and then after that, get into the interior. When you acquire a property with a rebrand intent, what kind of a timeline do you look at as far as, from start to finish? Yeah,
so the big thing that we look at is, when is the optimal leasing time? And across the country, it's summer, right? Spring and summer. So we have had an asset, one of our assets, we acquired it in April of last year. And we actually did the exterior work, but we didn't actually touch the leasing office until September, till after the leasing season was over, because we want to keep the team in the leasing center. We can focus on doing the siding and the rebranding, but the leasing center itself and the amenities, we kicked that till September when it was a bit slower, so it didn't affect our occupancy. In general, so 2 things you got to remember is what time of year are you picking the asset up? if you're picking, ideally you'd like to pick the asset up in January because it's a slow season. You can get in, you've got 3 or 4 months to get in before the leasing season starts. But if you do pick it up midway through the year, it's okay to split up, and have 2 different paths of construction, one being the exterior, landscaping that can be done pretty quickly within 2 to 3 months, and then maybe you kick the leasing office to a slower winter season where people are there's not as much traffic and volume, so people can be focused on just getting the leasing done. In general, we like to have our team out of the leasing office no longer than 8 weeks. But that means you have to, as the owner or as the asset manager, you have to have your excuse my language, your crap in line, because if you don't have the bids done, if you don't have the layout done, if you haven't chosen the specs, moving someone out and then spending the next 2 months trying to figure all that out, and then you start the construction process, that is not the best use of time. You really need to be on top of it and make sure your general contractor is aligned. You have a designer if you have one. We use an interior designer to help us with all our interior design decisions, and the choice of the specifications for the flooring, for the paint, for the light fixtures, because we will spend more in the leasing office and the gym on our unit turns. We already have the specifications because we roll out the same type of turn across all our units. So that specification is already done. That can be handed to GC. He can go straight to work. But through every asset that we buy, the leasing office is going to be different. Different flooring, different wall coverings, different feel, and how's the design going to look? Because again, it goes back to that wow factor when someone walks into the leasing office and says, wow, this is awesome. I want to live here. I'm already subconsciously thinking about that. So does that answer your question?
Yeah. No, and you just made me think here. Given that the attention to detail and specifically to the leasing office and kind of that look and feel of the community kind of thing, how much time is allotted for design work and colors and all that? Because I'm assuming that through your due diligence and all that stuff, are you able to get on that a little bit?
Yeah, we make sure we've chosen the color palette by the time we put an LOI and we get under contract. By the time we've closed, we've at least got the color palette chosen, and we've probably got a new sign brand, designed through the third-party teams that we use. Then we get temporary signs made in that new logo, and we'll plaster it over everything, over the old signs, and then because we can't actually go and apply for permits until we close on the asset, right. It's not our asset. Then the signage company will come along. They will go and pull permits. That typically takes about a month. But you've already done the design work on the front end, and then it takes probably another 3 to 4 weeks to install those new signs, depending on how big they are, how big the monument signs are. At the same time, it's hard to get all the questions answered from the interior leasing point of view until you take over the asset as well, because in due diligence, we're walking the leasing office, we're getting measurements. I'm getting probably my designer and my GC out to take a look, but final decisions on where we back into can really only happen once you've spent 3 or 4 times on site. I usually have a budget, and that budget needs to be met by my interior designer. She's an artist, right? So she goes off and does all these beautiful drawings, and I'm like, this looks great. I'm going to get it priced up by my general contractor, get it priced up, and then I come through and I do value engineering. I cross it all out. Nope, that doesn't work. No, we've got to get rid of that. And we won't lose the feel of it, but there'll be certain stuff that I will go and cross out because we can't afford it. So we definitely look at where's our best bang for buck spent to get that most wow factor. And typically it's spent in the leasing office. But some things like the type of flooring. She might have priced out a $6 a square foot flooring. And I'm like, no, we can get away with a $3 a square foot flooring. She might have wall coverings. I'm like, well, let's not have a wall covering. Let's just do a mural in terms of a painting, because paint's cheaper than a wall covering. So maybe you do a weird image on the wall, sort of a pattern, and that gives it a wow factor. It's the same sort of thing, but it's a lot cheaper. So just different little things like that. And I've been in the construction business for over 10 years, being a civil engineer and an owner's rep, before all of this. So I know that the process in which it comes to that sort of negotiating when it comes, designers are great, but you've got to reel them in as the owner sometimes and say, look, we've got to hit our budget here. Otherwise I'm not spending, $6,000 on a couch.
Right. No, reality, the budget meets reality there. So.
Right. Exactly.
No. appreciate you taking us through that, because I think that the timeline thing and really, people, well, I say people, my experience has been that if you're not looking forward, you're going to be playing catch up all along. And the fact that you were talking about how you've gone through it during the due diligence and, during the work through, you've got a good feel for what you're going to do so that you can hit the ground running on day one. That's awesome. I want to shift gears here just real quick. As you know, by day I'm an insurance broker, and one of the things we deal with is risk management. And there's three different strategies for risk management. You can avoid the risk, you can minimize the risk, or you can transfer the risk. And insurance is essentially that risk transfer mechanism. I'm asking my guest, and I'd love to get your input, if you could identify what you see as the biggest risk you face as an apartment syndicator.
Mm-hmm. From an insurance point of view?
No, it does not have to be an insurance point of view. And I guess I want to make that very clear. If you can think of it in a way of just, if you tie insurance in, that's fine, but I'm really not looking for insurance.
I can give you one on the insurance. So goes back to building construction best practices. And in the 80s, assets were built without fire sprinklers. So you'll get to know that things that are built in the 90s, and particularly in the early 2000s, fire sprinklers are everywhere because it was required by code as code changed over the years. But if you've got a 1980s asset or earlier, they will probably not have fire sprinklers, which means your insurance for fire is going to go up and your premium is going to go up. So having the newer type of construction, we talked about the 9-foot ceilings. Typically with 9-foot ceilings, you'll have fire sprinkler heads. In my experience, things that are built in the mid-90s and soon or later will have fire sprinklers, and that will help you with your insurance. Hail damage, roof insurance, all that sort of stuff. You've really got to be on top of when roofs need to be replaced. Depending on when you're buying, like in Texas, they have a lot of hailstorms. So a lot of insurance companies will replace roofs when the hailstorm comes through. And we need to really be on top of that when we look at the due diligence, because a roof can cost you $300,000-$400,000, and if you haven't budgeted for it, well, that's taken out of the exterior budget. Your leasing offer is not going to look as good. So that's the type of insurance risk you got to look at as a syndicator. In terms of the biggest risk, well, there's so many risks when you're a syndicator. There's obviously finding the right deal. If we start from the beginning, finding the right deal, underwriting it correctly. What assumptions have you put into the underwriting to make sure that you're protecting your investors' principal? Because we invest in real estate to make money. We don't invest in real estate to lose money. I think in terms of where we are in the market cycle, we are looking at newer types of assets. From a risk point of view, and this ties into insurance. We look at newer build assets because there's less skeletons in the closet. They're individually metered, right? A 1990s or earlier built in the 2000s, they'll have individual meters on water, on electric. They'll have fire sprinklers. They'll have individual heaters. They'll have individual HVAC systems. So there's less likely to have issues as you move down the track through ownership. There's less heavy lifting we have to do. So you can go and buy an asset that was built in 2000s at the same cap rate as you can buy an asset that's built in the 1990s, but 1980s, I should say. But there's going to be a lot more potential risk items from an insurance point of view and a construction point of view that could come and bite you in the ass later on. So we look at that, we weigh that up and say, okay, well, I'm going to spend less money on the front end, but I still get the same cap rate coming out of the gate. Why would I go buy a 1980s asset? The second thing is, where are you buying? Core in-plus value add locations are extremely important. I would not be buying in the tertiary market right now. I'm buying where the population is growing. I'm buying where there's multiple employers. So there's people will always have a job. I'm really looking for a value add proposition. I don't want to buy something that is being touched by someone else, because that's not the true value add. There's all these things out in the market right now, or, value add, but the whole exterior is being touched and, 30% of the units are being touched in the interiors, and the brokers will sell it to you as we'll just come and finish those off. Well, one things that we've seen, as I explained before, you don't ever do 100% of the units. You've got to come in and do 50%, maybe a silver package. You need to do maybe some that are the gold. Maybe you only do 10% of gold and you leave the rest as classic because you want to offer that smorgasbord to people in these markets that, remember, we're in the game of affordable housing. We can't, you can't come in and expect to buy a 1980s asset and increase the rent to $2,500 a month like you get in Portland and Los Angeles. We're not in those markets. And if you are in those markets and you're buying and syndicating, I bet you my bottom dollar, it's not cash flowing because you're buying it at a cap rate over 2 and 3%. So you got to look at, there's so many different risks, from insurance to the type of build to where you're buying and where the path of progress is if you are buying in those secondary markets. And how is that going to help you be future-proof your investment to make sure that the value is there and that your investors' capital is protected, and you're going to make money in the long term. So a number of things there for your listeners.
No, I appreciate that. And I would love to, at a later date, talk with you more just about that differentiation between the class of assets, because I think there is that thought process right now that the cap rate is the market cap rate and not necessarily the asset class.
Correct.
And I think that, trying to get a 2 cap or a C property to work at a 2 cap is, well, good luck with that. So.
Yeah, but then just to touch on that, you got people buying here in Los Angeles and in Portland who will buy 1980s assets at 3 cap because historically, that Los Angeles and Portland are true growth markets. They're looking for capital preservation. They want to park their money and not touch it for 15 years. Well, hey, that buying at a 3% cap rate and you're a mega wealthy person, that's great. If you're buying it all cash, it's 3%. It's better than sitting in a bank and, you're having your money's depreciating over time sitting in a bank. So, because of inflation. So there's just different ways. And probably for your listeners who are listening to the show, yes, we're thinking about the cash flowing stuff of it, but there's other sides that I see investors going and buying, silly prices, but they've got different wants and needs for their money. Hence why they can go chase different yield and different investment plays. So at the end of the day, we've got to remember, you're in the business of real estate, and real estate makes its most money over the long term. If you're thinking you're going to get in and get rich quick in real estate, then you're in the wrong business, because it literally is a 10 to 15 year horizon. If you have too much of a short term horizon, thinking I'm going to get in and flip it in 3 years, that is when risk comes into your deal, and that is when you can lose your shirt. And so just wanted to touch on that for a second.
No, I love that, and amen to all of that. The kind of the time is I think that's the thing that a lot of times gets forgotten. But that's good stuff. Reed, I want to be respectful of your time here, and appreciate you taking the time to talk today. Where can the listeners go if they'd like to learn more and connect with you?
Yeah, you can head over to my website at readgoossens.com. I've just launched a new book. You'll find all the links and stuff there. You can listen to my podcast. You can download my ebooks. You can pick up a book from Amazon. So it's all on the website. It's readgoossens.com. And check it out there. And if you have any listeners who are ever coming through LA and they want to hit me up and go for a beer or get a coffee or go for lunch, then just shoot me an email at info@readgoossens.com.
Awesome. I will put all that in the show notes. And Reed, I want to say thanks again for taking the time to talk. Learned a lot, enjoyed it, and look forward to doing it again soon.
Thank you very much, mate.
All right. For our listeners, if you like this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Remember, the more you know, the more you grow. That's all we've got this week. Until next time, thanks for listening to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CREPN Radio.